to be here, to be able to open this conference, and also to be able to discuss and reflect on such an important topic these days, which would be the relationship between think tanks and their communities. I do think that it was a great idea for think tanks to take the initiative to shed light on the different roles that think tanks have taken throughout the years. To me, it would be quite absurd to think that since the early 20th century, think tanks have remained the same regarding their objectives, their functions, their missions, their activities, and that all of these have remained unchanged. Because that would mean that the think tank model is static. And I have to say that it really isn't. That would actually also mean that the version of myself at 5 years old, and 10, and 15, and 20, and 30, and 35 years old, and 40 and 47, which is where I stand today, is exactly the same. And that really the social and the economic context in which I grew up really didn't affect or shape my development at all. So all of us here are aware of the fact that for decades, think tanks have been able to play a fundamental role in shaping public policies. Traditionally, we've been seen as organizations that conduct analysis, but also generate research and data that have been essential for decision makers. And despite the fact that think tanks around the world vary in terms of their focus and their context, I would say that influencing the public sphere is part of their essence. I would say that that would be the foundational and the traditional role that largely explains our raison d'être, as perhaps the French would say. But also, let's not forget that think tanks are catalysts of change and catalysts of innovation. And that in many regions of the world, we've been able to be resilient and also adapt to different contexts. And when I think about this different context or this new context, I think about three main factors. And so the first one would be perhaps a weakening or a breakdown in the relationship with the public sector. And so the second one would probably be a shift in donor priorities. And the third one would also be just decisions taken by the think tanks. So definitely I would say that this context has led us to think about different ways in which impact can be made and also open new channels of communication with new and with different actors. So as a think tank, if you're in any of these situations, you can't really act as business as usual and just pretend that nothing has changed. And I really wouldn't want to make generalizations because I know that every think tank is different. But for example, I know for a fact that many organizations in the Latin American region have exchanged the communication with the public sector with work with the community. And this could definitely involve all areas of research or just perhaps only some. And so at this point, I would like to pause and reflect about this concept of community. To me, it would be quite inaccurate to conceive the community as a group of people or a homogeneous group of people with the same interests and the same objectives. And within communities, I would say that think tanks mainly relate with civil society organizations and also certain demographic groups that could be like women, for example, or indigenous groups, or the youth. And so in this scenario, we do assume that policy change is possible when we empower the community. So again, considering this scenario where there is a possible change of actors, a question would be like, how can we effectively then engage with our community? So here I would give you like three main advices. So the first one would be, stay away from our sophisticated and very technical language and instead promote a much more simple and didactic communication style. We must make sure that our ideas do resonate outside the circles of specialists. And I have to say that I am convinced that the simplicity in language facilitates understanding and also removes barriers with the community. And let me give you an example of a situation that happened in my country. For example, in 2015, when the national anti-corruption system was first established, there were many doubts regarding its operation. So the system is governed by 7 regulatory laws that, to be honest, are quite difficult to understand except for lawyers. So at Ethos, we were interested in promoting citizen participation. However, we did realize that nobody would voluntarily want to invest part of their time to sit and trying to decipher this really complex normative framework around the national anti-corruption system. So what happened next? At Ethos, we decided to publish an anti-corruption booklet. At that moment, the libro vaquero, or the cowboy book, held a really special place in the Mexican pop culture. Actually, it was the most widely read publication in the whole country, and it reached rural and also urban areas. So by making an alliance with the editors, we were able to introduce a new chapter to the story in order to explain the basic concepts of the system. And we were also able to answer some fundamental questions, such as what is the importance of the system, what is the objective, how can citizens participate. And I have to say that we also, or the initiative also aimed at fostering a culture of legality. So the comic book was actually quite successful, and we ended up printing many more copies. So actually, I brought a copy here with me. So if you want to take a look at it. So this is like the additional copy that we did at Ethos, but you could actually buy the original story in the stalls in the streets where you would sell magazines and also newspapers. And so this one would come with the original one for free. So if you want to just pass it around to see what the cowboy book looked like. So let me go on to my second advice. So that would be to reassess the power of collaboration. And when think tanks find it useful, I think that we should do alliances with, like I said, other organizations. And this can perhaps translate into building networks at a subnational level, as has been our case. It may increase the likelihood for policy change. And so for this purpose, in 2019 at Ethos, we created 2 collectives of organizations. And so the first one was called, or is called, the Anti-Corruption Citizen Force. And the second one is called Suitable Profiles Now. So together, both collectives add to more than 30 civil society organizations across the whole country. So in general terms, their purpose or the objective of these organizations or of these collectives is to highlight the deficiencies in both the design but also the implementation of the national anti-corruption system. Also, with these collectives, we want to generate pressure for the appropriate appointments of key or strategic positions within the national system. So let me tell you that with the support of both of these collectives, we were able to push back on a presidential decree that aimed at eliminating one of the key institutions within the national anti-corruption system. So my third advice would be so that in order to improve the relationship with the community, it is very important to adapt the information so that it can be understood by certain demographic groups. Let me tell you that at Ethos, for example, we have worked with indigenous population in the anti-corruption topic. We know for a fact that in order to mitigate corruption, it is important to include the entire population. We need the support of the entire population. However, we need to be aware of the fact that there are certain demographic groups that face certain disparities and challenges when trying to access knowledge and also information. For example, how could indigenous groups participate in a system such as the National Anti-Corruption System when the information is only published in Spanish or through electronic means, which are sometimes not even accessible to them? So let me tell you that a few years ago, we worked with Quintiltic. And so Quintiltic is a civil society organization in the state of Chiapas. This would be one of the poorest states in Mexico. And we wanted to make a diagnosis on how corruption affects indigenous communities. And as a result, we created a communications and awareness campaigns where we published different materials. And I have to say that we published these materials such as videos and infographics and many others in 6 indigenous languages. And we also emphasized the importance of access to culturally relevant information. I have to say that I do believe that little by little, the democratization of knowledge will become an objective for every think tank. And this would mean not only publishing our policy papers or our publications, but making sure that the material is understood and is also useful for everyone. So next, I'd like to share with you the type of support that we as think tanks can provide to the community. And I have to say that as a first step, we need to realize that the community holds very valuable knowledge and also experiences that can be integrated into the design and the implementation of public policies. So think tanks are also beginning to recognize that change is also possible when we embrace our role as facilitators and also as collaborators. I have to say that think tanks have the ability to be effective partners to communities in order to complement the empirical knowledge of these local actors with the rigorous methods and strategies that we have in order to generate impact. Our research and analysis expertise allows us to offer an evidence-based approach to the challenges that are faced by these communities. And secondly, think tanks have the opportunity to help strengthen the community's learning processes. We can help them to better articulate their needs, to identify effective solutions, and also advocate for changes. And if this is something that interests them, we can also help them strengthen their capacity to interact with local authorities. In order to ensure that their voices are heard in the decision-making process. And in this regard, think tanks can also play a crucial role in coordinating different actors in order to ensure a more efficient but also greater sustainability of the interventions. And I would also like to address another of the questions that is guiding this conference. And that would be, how can think tanks build trust with the communities? And in response, I'd like to say that transparency and clarity is crucial. We must explain in a very simple way what is the purpose of our work. And we should also explain what would be the timeline, who would be the participating actors. A very important thing is to make sure that we explain whether there will be funding involved and also what will be the expected results. Similarly, we also have to be very open to answer any questions that the members of the community may have. And it is also important to consider that perhaps other organizations might have tried to work in that community or other think tanks as well. And so if that relationship did not yield the expected result, there might be some distrust in the community towards external actors. In our experience, it's also very important to be flexible and to be adapt. Every hour that a person gives you, perhaps in an interview or in a training session, this is time that they could be spending in any other activity that could be giving them like an income. And we must take into consideration the social dynamics and try to adapt in order to facilitate an active participation. In this context, it is also very important to take into consideration the double or triple workload that sometimes women have. So finally, I want to emphasize that I know for a fact that some think tanks are already deeply immersed in this process of change. However, others may still maintain their traditional roles and perhaps haven't even considered any shift in direction in the near future. So if you, as a think tank, find yourself in this situation, I just have to say that it is perfectly acceptable. However, I think it's very important for us to know what the 2024 landscape may look like for some of the think tanks that are sitting in this conference. And for now, I think that the main idea I would like to put on the table would be that the work with the community should not be seen as a deviation, but rather as a natural expansion of our work. So I think that I would end my intervention here. And so if there are any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them.